The story of Esther, a queen's courage and God's providence. The story of Esther is one of the most remarkable accounts in the Bible. It's a tale of bravery, faith, and divine providence. It reveals how God can work through seemingly ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes, even in the face of immense danger. The Persian Empire and the Jewish exile. The story takes place during the reign of King Xerxes, also called Ahasuerus, of Persia, around 486 to 465 BC. Xerxes ruled over an immense empire, stretching from India to Ethiopia. Esther 1 verse 1. At this time, the Jewish people were living in exile, scattered across the Persian Empire after being displaced from their homeland during the Babylonian captivity. Despite their exile, God's hand of protection over his people is evident throughout the story, though his name is never explicitly mentioned in the book of Esther. This unique omission emphasizes God's providence in ways that are subtle yet undeniable. The fall of Queen Vashti. The story begins with a grand banquet. King Xerxes held an opulent feast lasting 180 days to showcase his wealth and power. At the end of this celebration, he hosted a 7-day feast for all the people in Susa, the capital city. Esther 1 verses 3 to 9. On the final day, the king, in a drunken state, ordered Queen Vashti to appear before the crowd wearing her royal crown to display her beauty. Esther 1 verses 10 to 11. Vashti refused, an act of defiance that shocked everyone. Furious, Xerxes consulted his advisors, who warned that Vashti's disobedience might inspire other women in the kingdom to disrespect their husbands. To maintain control and establish a precedent, Xerxes deposed Vashti and issued a decree that she could never again enter his presence. Esther 1 verses 19 to 20. With Vashti gone, the king began a search for a new queen. The rise of Esther. Xerxes ordered a beauty contest across the empire to find his new queen. Young women were brought to the royal palace and placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who prepared them with beauty treatments for a year before they met the king. Esther 2 verses 3 and 12. Among the young women was a Jewish girl named Hadassah, more commonly known as Esther. She was an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, a devout Jew who worked in the king's court. Esther 2 verses 5 to 7. Mordecai instructed Esther not to reveal her Jewish heritage, knowing it could put her life at risk. Despite her humble beginnings, Esther quickly gained favor with Haggai, who gave her the best treatments and accommodations. Esther 2 verse 9. When Esther was presented to the king, Xerxes was captivated by her beauty and grace. He placed the royal crown on her head, making her queen of Persia. Esther 2 verse 17. Mordecai uncovers a plot. During this time, Mordecai remained a protective figure in Esther's life, often sitting near the palace gates to hear news of her well-being. One day, Mordecai overheard a plot by 2 palace guards to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai reported this to Esther, who informed the king in Mordecai's name. The plot was thwarted, and the incident was recorded in the King's Chronicles. Esther 2 verses 21 to 23. Though no reward was given to Mordecai at the time, this act of loyalty would play a critical role later in the story. Haman's evil plot. Enter Haman, the story's antagonist. Haman was an Agagite and a high-ranking official in Xerxes' court, second only to the king. Esther 3 verse 1. He was arrogant and demanded that everyone bow down to him. Mordecai, however, refused to bow, likely because of his faith and loyalty to God. Esther 3 verse 2. Haman's rage toward Mordecai grew, and he devised a plan to destroy not only Mordecai but all the Jews in the Persian Empire. Using his influence, Haman convinced Xerxes to issue a decree for the extermination of the Jews, presenting them as a threat to the empire's unity. Esther 3 verses 8 to 10. The date for the massacre was set, and letters were sent to all provinces announcing the destruction of the Jews. Esther 3 verse 13. Mordecai appeals to Esther. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and mourned publicly. Esther 4 verse 1. He sent a message to Esther, urging her to plead with the king on behalf of her people. Esther hesitated at first, knowing that approaching the king without being summoned could result in death. Esther 4 verse 11. But Mordecai's words stirred her courage. Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Esther 4 verses 13 to 14. Determined, Esther asked Mordecai and all the Jews in Susa to fast for 3 days and nights, and she resolved to approach the king, saying, "If I perish, I perish." Esther 4 verse 16. Esther's courage before the king. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her royal robes and approached the king. When Xerxes saw her, he extended his golden scepter, sparing her life. Esther 5 verse 2. Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared, skillfully setting the stage for her request. Esther 5 verse 4. At the banquet, Esther didn't immediately reveal her plea. Instead, she invited them to a second banquet, building suspense and ensuring Haman's confidence in his favor with the king. Esther 5 verse 8. Haman's downfall. That night, Xerxes couldn't sleep. He ordered the royal chronicles to be read to him and was reminded of Mordecai's earlier act of loyalty in uncovering the assassination plot. The king realized Mordecai had never been rewarded and decided to honor him. Esther 6 verses 1 to 3. In a twist of irony, Haman was tasked with parading Mordecai through the streets, proclaiming his honor, when he had planned to execute him. Esther 6 verses 10 to 11. Haman's humiliation deepened his hatred and fear. At Esther's second banquet, she revealed her Jewish heritage and exposed Haman's plot to annihilate her people. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request." Esther 7 verse 3. When Xerxes learned of Haman's treachery, he was enraged. Haman was executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. Esther 7 verses 9 to 10. The salvation of the Jews. Though Haman was gone, the decree to annihilate the Jews still stood. Persian law could not be revoked, but Esther and Mordecai worked with the king to issue a new decree. The Jews were granted the right to defend themselves against their enemies. Esther 8 verse 11. On the appointed day, the Jews triumphed over their enemies, and the threat of annihilation was reversed. Esther 9 verses 1 to 5. The victory was celebrated with feasting and joy, and the Jewish people established the Feast of Purim to commemorate their deliverance. Esther 9 verses 20 to 22. Lessons from Esther's story. 1. God's providence. Even when his name isn't mentioned, God is always at work behind the scenes. 2. Courage in the face of fear. Esther risked her life to save her people, showing that bravery often means stepping out in faith despite uncertainty. 3. The power of influence. Esther used her position for a greater purpose, reminding us to use our influence for good. 4. Faith through action. Mordecai's and Esther's actions show that faith isn't passive. It involves trusting God while stepping forward in obedience. As we close the story of Esther, we are reminded of the profound truths it holds. In the face of danger, Esther showed courage. In the midst of injustice, Mordecai stood firm. And in the hands of a sovereign God, their faithfulness turned the tide of history. Esther's story is not just about her bravery. It's about the God who works behind the scenes, orchestrating events for his glory and his people's good. From the humble gates of Susa to the grand halls of the Persian palace, God's providence is evident, reminding us that even when his name isn't spoken, his hand is at work. Let us carry this truth with us. No matter how dire the circumstances, we serve a God who is always in control. Like Esther, we are called to trust him, to rise to the moment we were created for, and to stand firm in faith for such a time as this. Thank you for journeying through this incredible story with us. If it's inspired you, strengthened your faith, or given you hope, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Together, let's live boldly and faithfully, knowing that God's purposes will always prevail. Until next time, may you walk in faith and courage, trusting the God who turns trials into triumphs.